Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Hotep. Today's video is about the 8 limbs of yoga. Please bear in mind, I'm not an expert, I'm not an academic, I'm not a professional when it comes to this stuff. I'm merely just an occultist and a witch who has been practicing and studying yoga and trying to live the yogic and Buddhist life on and off since I was 16 years old. Mostly on, not so much off. I'm a big proponent or a big supporter of the idea of meditation. So meditation has been incredibly beneficial for me for a number of reasons. So if there are various ways that one can learn how to meditate, and if there are various ways to incorporate meditation and living a spiritual life in general into your life, then I'm definitely going to be up there to try and figure out what those are and then sharing the information with you guys once I experience it for myself. With that said, on the note of me not being an expert or an academic or anything, please bear in mind that this merely is supposed to be sort of a jumping off point, especially for newbies or people who just want a refresher. It's supposed to kind of whet your appetite, as it were, so that if you do want to go off and study a bit more about yoga and how to incorporate it into your spiritual life as well as your magic or occult life, then this should just sort of be one of those kind of like side primers that you can always check back on just in case. I can guarantee there probably are a ton of other much better, much more succinct videos out there, but I just thought I would give you guys my own 2 cents based entirely on my own experiences. So without further ado, the 8 limbs of yoga.
What we found in your room justified all our fears. How long have you been reading these horrid books?
That old black magic has me.
That's right.
That old black magic
Close your eyes.
The door opened, as though being pulled by some unknown force.
The 8 limbs, you will often see them depicted in a wheel. The idea is that they all kind of work in conjunction with each other, and they also help to prep you as each stage goes on. So the yamas will prep you for the niyamas will prep you for asana will prep you for pranayama, Prathyahara, and such and so forth, going all the way round to Samadhi, and then back and across and up and down, and you name it. So it's a whole web and it's beautiful. So yeah. So the very first limb on the wheel of yoga is Yama. This deals with the idea of adhering to or understanding the restraints that you can put on yourself in order to live a more spiritual life and a more spiritual lifestyle. Underneath this particular branch, there are 5 other branches as well that deal with non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, moderation or celibacy. Is it moderation and celibacy? Kind of. They're kind of like intertwined with one another. And non-possessiveness or hoarding. The idea for that is to live a more spiritual life. They aren't necessarily commandments or rules that you have to live by absolutely every single day. It's just something that you should learn to understand and try and adhere to, and take time to think about things before you go through with something to see if it's going to be beneficial for you or for other people or for the greater good and such and so forth. One of my favorite branches under that is ahimsa, which deals with non-violence. And this is a really important aspect of the yamas that I think a lot of people tend to misunderstand. The idea of the yamas is understanding your place within the universe. From an occult perspective, it's the idea of living your life in accordance with your will. So for example, ahimsa, non-violence, means you wake up every day and you make sure you do your absolute best not to harm any other living thing, whether it's a person, an animal, an insect. But also the one thing that tends to get forgotten is making sure that you don't become violent to yourself. And I don't mean violent as in you know, using weapons or anything like that necessarily. I mean, that doesn't, it's also included, like, don't use that. But it also means don't put yourself through mental torture if you don't need to. Don't go out of your way to hurt yourself because you're trying to impress somebody else. If someone does something that you feel morally you don't want to do because it's not going to be beneficial for you or the other person, or you could find yourself in trouble, then say so, or just remove yourself from that situation completely. And another really big thing, which is a very magical thing, the idea that magical words or anything that you say and think has magic to them is not wrong. It's about being non-violent in your thoughts, being non-violent about your body, being non-violent about yourself spiritually. The whole idea is to encompass everything that you will experience as a human being living a spiritual life. So whether you're a practitioner of yoga or atheism or the occult and so forth, the idea is just to be a compassionate and kind individual who has gratitude. You can acknowledge things, but at the same time, you're keeping it real. If something doesn't work, or if you just need to have a day off because you're stressed out, or you feel like you need to remove yourself from a situation because you can really feel yourself saying something impulsively and quite hurtful to someone, and it's easy for you to just walk away from that situation, then by all means, do it. It's the idea of just guiding yourself to have your own personal principles and ethics in order to be a better person. It's basically what it is. So Ahimsa is my favorite, but I will be discussing more of the Niyamas and Yamas in another video coming up. The next limb on the wheel of yoga is Niyama. Niyama, just like the Yamas, also has 5 extra branches underneath its tree as well. Those deal with, I'm just going through my notes, self-examination and study, self-discipline, contentment and happiness, purity, and the most important one, surrendering yourself to the divine or a deity or the greater good. So that kind of covers it. If you're religious, spiritual, or an atheist, it kind of covers everything. So you're good, you've got no excuse. The idea is that you will build up much deeper spirituality. You can deepen your connection to the divine, to the cosmos, to the universe. It's more of a spiritual and philosophical way to live your life in comparison to the Yamas. The Yamas are more practical, everyday guidelines that you can adhere to, and then the Niyamas are more of the spiritual aspects of that, which is why they're often sort of like pinned together. Whenever you see the lists, they're often together. What I've written here these are more philosophical and instructional pointers for someone to live by, as I just mentioned. For witches, this can be a combination of daily banishing, whilst working your magic in honor of your patron or such and so forth, or other deities or the universe in general. It's what keeps us spiritual with practice and general life and living, in order to be the best that we can be, living our best magical life, as it were. So the Niyamas deal with more personal, the Yamas are more daily practical guidelines. The third limb on the wheel of yoga is Asana. Asana translates to sitting. Asana is the posture. So when people say that they practice yoga, what they're actually saying is they practice Asana at the gym or at home and so forth. Taking time to work through Asana or a routine allows us to be present in the moment, to become aware of ourselves and our bodies. It's that level of understanding, awareness of the self, through your physical self, body, and awareness of your mind as you're trying to prepare it to go into a state of meditation. How we're holding posture, what are the feelings that we have before, during, and after asana? Do I feel like my chest is more open? Do I feel more connected to myself or my higher self? Am I less stressed, etc.? These are the kind of questions that you should be sort of asking yourself before, during, and after, because that way you can always sort of track your progress as far as asana practice is concerned. It's good to practice movement in general so that you can be on top of any changes that you go through. It's also helpful for working magic, as you can be more flexible and can better sense and work with the energies within and outside of yourself. With the energy there, I just mean prana, or just magic. It's what most people in the West would regard as being just magic. In the East, they call it prana. Also, if you're more sort of experienced when it comes to magic, so if you're a ceremonial magician, if you're just a magician who does more rituals and things like that, practicing asana again is really essential for any movements or any postures needed for the ritual working that you're going to be working on, or something that you're going to eventually work on in the future. The idea for most occultists is to eventually practice and get to that point of samadhi. So if you've already gotten to that point, you can really tap into that high level of transcendence with your ritual magic and conjure up some of the most amazing workings possible in your own experience, if that makes sense. Okay. The fourth limb on the wheel of yoga is pranayama. So this deals with breath work or breath control. It's the idea of understanding and becoming more aware of the power of the breath and learning how to control the power of the breath, and also becoming more aware of how prana moves around your body. So when you combine pranayama practice with yoga practice, which also kind of lends its way into the early stages of studying Kundalini, when you combine the two, so for example, you get yourself into a particular asana that you want to focus on for the next week or two, you want to focus on this particular asana, you will find that doing breath work will help you deepen your practice of that particular asana. You become more flexible. Oxygen and blood are able to enter parts of your body that they normally wouldn't do in your everyday life. Most people are so used to just sitting down or walking the same distance or walking in the same areas, not really doing anything extra. So when practicing asana in combination with pranayama, you're getting oxygen and blood flow into other parts of your body. So that's one of the physical aspects. For the spiritual aspect, it also helps with, like I said, just moving prana around your body. If you find yourself in a position where you need to vibrate holy words or holy names, or you need to vibrate or say out loud certain words of power, certain incantations, being able to control your breath with the practice of pranayama will help you sort of like intone those words with even more energy than you would do otherwise or previously, if that makes sense. It just deepens your practice at an even more deeper level. Again, I keep saying this, it deepens your practice, but it's true. With discipline and with practice, your own magical practices become deeper. They become much more profound experiences, and that ultimately should be the goal of every witch, every pagan, every occultist, and such and so forth. That's the idea of living the spiritual life. The idea is that the magic is within you, so you can work within that. You can learn to rely on yourself, but at the same time, there's also the fact that you're also connected to a much larger picture. You are a star among stars. You are part of the macrocosm as a micro individual. So if you're connected to all of the magic around you and you have magic within you, there's nothing stopping you from being able to utilize that magic whenever you see fit. Do you see what I mean? I hope I'm starting to make sense. So pranayama practice, even though it is about the breath, it's about learning to control your mind. It's about learning to control the breath. It's about taking your mind off other things, because you'll be focusing entirely on what breath practice you're actually doing. On a spiritual level, it's also a lot more than that. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, the fifth limb is Prathyahara. This deals with the withdrawal of the senses. This is where you practice drawing on the senses of the mind and the body. So touch, taste, smell, etc., etc. And then working out ways to deepen and heighten them by focusing in concentration. So At the beginning of your practice, you will start perhaps finding an asana to get yourself into. Then you'll start practicing breath work, either separately or together. Once you start doing that, you're so focused on the breath, you're so focused on your asana that outside influences don't really bother you anymore. Obviously, make sure you're practicing yoga in a safe space. Don't have like candles everywhere when you know your cat's just gonna knock stuff over. Like, come on, let's be real. Be non-violent to yourself, don't get mad, but have some logic. So make sure that the place is completely safe. And then that way, when you're practicing asana and going into a meditation or both, and you're also practicing breath work, you can really deepen that experience. The idea is that you're preparing and also calming your body for meditation and intense concentration. This is the moment right before you visualize a magical working or a sacred image or sorts. So what I mean by that is, this is the point where, for example, if you're practicing the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, it's the points where you are then visualizing the white light. You're then visualizing the blue light from your finger when you're drawing out the pentagram. It will help you deepen your practice of visualization, if that makes sense. Most people who practice witchcraft anyway, most people, when it's asking you to imagine or vibrate words or imagine the spell working or using visualization techniques with your magical working, that's the point in which you need to sort of get yourself into that meditative state just before you start doing the visualization. So that's where Prathyahara will then come in, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? So for example, if you've written the word on the side of a candle, you've rubbed it up and down with the oils and the herbs and everything, and you're about to light it, but you need to take a moment just to sort of breathe, center yourself, then use the incantation as you're lighting. It's that split second before, when you're breathing and taking a moment before you then go ahead and start with the incantation. It's that idea of concentration and focus, but more focus than concentration, if that makes sense. Because now we're going to go into the next limb. So the next one is the sixth limb of yoga, which is known as Dharana. This is the idea of concentration, okay? Now you're focusing your intent, surrendering yourself to the moment, to the higher self, blah, 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 for that moment of here and now. It also means concentrating on an object other than yourself, whether that be mantra, prayer, or a candle, etc., for which this could be the time in the middle of a working to maximize the potential of the working itself. You can work on your magic practices with far better ability as well. So like I said, when it comes to spells, rituals, and you name it, that's the point where you can say, okay, I'm completely ready. I can say the incantation and let's just go straight into this. It's the whole process. Depending on what kind of rituals and spells you're doing, especially when it comes to spells, if the spell or the working is asking you to start the working, so from the oils to the herbs and everything, focus on your breath as you're getting the candle ready. Focus on the breath as you're writing out the incantation or writing out the petition. Focus on the breath just before you light that candle and set that petition alight and put it down to watch it burn. When you're actually watching that incantation or the petition burn in the bowl, or when you're watching the candle burn down, that's the time when you're supposed to focus on your breath, focus on your concentration, focus on Prathyahara, and then start focusing on your concentration and the intent of the actual working. So hopefully that will make sense. The seventh limb on the wheel is Dhyana. This is hyper concentration at its purest and its best. In other words, it's known as meditation. Meditation is just essential for everyday life and living in general. You don't even have to be spiritual to do this. It's free. Just take 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day and just meditate. Oh, the benefits are glorious. And I'm not saying that because I'm being hokey or whatever. I'm being genuine. Meditation is an absolute lifesaver if you have mental health issues, if you have kids, if you have a very stressful life. Just taking a few minutes a day to yourself to focus on sitting in an asana, sitting down on a chair, which is still technically classed as an asana, practicing pranayama and pratyahara, so breathing, focusing on the senses, and just being completely, just putting yourself in a position where you can just completely surrender to yourself and thus surrendering to the universe at the same time for only a few minutes a day is essential. When you take time to practice meditation before and during a magical working, and even after when you're grounding, it's a wonderful feeling. You will feel more tapped into the prana that you're going to be using or you have used during that time. You can ground yourself a lot more faster, but at the same time, when you're actually doing the magical working itself, meditation allows for you to really appreciate the magical working and thus perhaps even speeding up the working a little bit faster, making the working a lot more bigger. Whereas if you didn't put a lot of thought, effort and preparation into a working, you can feel the subtle differences. You can feel the difference between a half-assed spell versus one that's really well thought out and planned out and you've done it properly to a T. Even if the outcome isn't necessarily going to be a positive one or a negative one and such and so forth, the fact that you've already started encompassing how to live more of a yogic life as a witch or a pagan or an occultist and such and so forth means that you will still continue to have that faith in the connectedness with yourself and the universe. And if it doesn't work out, then that's fine. That's something that you can get introspective with later on, and you can even spend time when you're being introspective with your journal and meditate on what might have gone wrong or meditate on what went well. Meditation, it's just something that I absolutely love. So I do get very passionate about meditation, which is why I tend to kind of talk about it an awful lot. It's great for mental health and such and so forth. And I cannot tell you how many times meditation has helped me change the negative and violent thoughts that I've had about myself. So I'm very much a big fan of meditation. So you'll learn that throughout time on this channel. But that's Dhyana, that's meditation. So when you've actually managed to encompass the physical aspects as well as the spiritual and the philosophical aspects of the first 7 limbs of the Wheel of Yoga, this should eventually lead you to a point of ultimate awareness, transcendence, almost nirvana, and that's known as the 8th limb of yoga, Samadhi. And the last limb on the wheel of yoga is Samadhi, or if you're in the West, Samadhi. The convergence, or at least Samadhi, is the convergence of the limbs into a hyper state of peace and transcendence. This is the goal for yogic practice, and also the end goal for most occultists and ceremonial magicians and the lot and the like. For occultists, this is the state that you want to be able to attain in order to have even deeper experiences with ritual practice, and especially more complex rituals and workings that do take a while. For example, one of those workings being the attainment of knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel, which is a big one that a lot of people, not just Thelemites, but it is mostly Thelemites, would like to be able to conduct and attain at some point in their own lives. The idea of reaching Samadhi, or knowledge and conversation, is so that you can tap into your highest and purest self, and you cannot get to that point unless you practice and practice and practice. You study and study. From what I understand, because I'm no expert when it comes to Samadhi or anything like that, some resources that I've gone to have said that Nirvana is down here and Samadhi is up here, as far as like a level of not importance, but like as far as like a trajectory is concerned, when you're on a spiritual trajectory, like nirvana's near the bottom or like some point down a particular kind of like hierarchy or list, and then samadhi is a little bit higher than nirvana. And in other places I looked at, it was stating that nirvana was actually higher than samadhi, and others are saying they're basically neck and neck. I don't know which one is true. I can only figure it out as time goes on, the more I practice. And I'm sure at some point in the future, if I do figure it out, I will let you guys know. Now we're going to move on to the book recommendations that I absolutely love and cannot live without. The very first book is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's a fantastic book. While there is a lot of information, including diagrams and the original Sanskrit, on Asana, Pranayama, Prathyahara, meditation, concentration, and there's a huge section on Samadhi as well, which I find absolutely amazing. This book is something that I highly, highly, highly recommend to a lot of people. From what I understand, whether it be for yoga teachers, other gurus, or just general practitioners of the occult, so much more what I would consider to be intermediate or higher tier magic, this is definitely one of those books that's a really good primer to your study. Side note, if you are an occultist, if you're an Thelemite or a chaos magician and such and so forth, there is another book which I highly do recommend. That one is called the Shiva Samhita. So get those two books and study them side by side. It's a great primer to delving straight into occult magic. So that book is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. The next book that you can see here is Light on Yoga by BKS Iyengar. He is the father of Iyengar Yoga, which I'm sure most people have probably already heard of. He died a few years ago, but his words and his wisdom continue to live on. This book is paramount for your yogic study, especially if you decide at a later point that you want to become a yogi yourself and start teaching yoga to students. This is definitely one of the top 3 books that you will need to have. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a copy of this book online as photos and whatnot, and people have just broken the spine because they love this book so much. He also has lots of other books, so after reading Light on Yoga, perhaps you can then go off and delve into his other works as well. And the last book that you can see here is The Tome. I love this book. Love this book. Whether you're training to be a yoga teacher yourself, whether you just want to get into yoga for yourself, whether you just want to read about yoga just to see how the other half live, listen, this book, the Sutras of Patanjali, will outline absolutely everything. This book contains 196 lines or 196 sutras that you can learn to adapt to your own life, which will then in turn help you live the more spiritual life. Most yoga texts, especially modern ones, especially those in the West, most modern yoga texts and teachings, most lines that your yoginis and yogis will be reciting at the gym, at home, in videos and such and so forth, they're getting most of their inspiration directly from this collection of sutras. This is the number one. In my personal opinion, just because I've read other texts as well, I would consider this one to be more like the holiest of the holiest when it comes to studying the Sanskrit texts as far as yoga is concerned. It's the number one. It's incredibly old, but I absolutely love it. The wisdom on its pages, second to none. So I highly recommend it. That's the Sutras of Patanjali. Thank you all so much for spending the time and watching this video. I do hope that you got something from this video somewhere. Like I said, it was just meant to whet your appetite and sort of get you interested and intrigued by the idea of living the yogic life, or at least studying the Sanskrit texts. So yeah, I guess that's kind of everything. Just thank you so much. If there's any information that you feel I've missed out, because I'm sure there's tons of information I've missed out, like I said, it was just a very very, very brief look into the 8 limbs in the most long form way possible. If there is anything that I have missed out, by all means, put it in the comment section down below, because that way you can educate me, but also educate other people who are also watching this video. So yeah, thank you very much. Have a lovely day, and don't forget to be kind and compassionate towards one another. MHotep.